Hi there. My name is Benjamin Preston. I have done my project has been on the 2022-2023 regular NBA basketball season, and I've looked at both LDA and canonical correlation. And in particular, I suppose my objective has been to think about how I could use the data that's available from a regular season of game data. If I was a bookmaker and I had to make odds on the probability of a home team win, and whether I could actually improve on either just randomization or not. And so I suppose that there's a couple of things that I wanted to do. I wanted to talk a little bit about how odds are made, and I suppose the importance of actually having models like this to at least open a market for odds. So I'll just get the scene. So in the US, odds are called moneyline. And that refers to where you place a bet on either the favorite or the underdog, or typically the underdog. And in the event that they win, you get a payout over and above the money that you waged. If you lose, if the team lose, you forfeit your bet. But there is a lifespan, and I just put these notes up here of how moneyline betting works. So there's an initial period where actually a market is set. So someone offers odds on the teams, and that market setting process is what I'm interested in today. So it's like, given the information that I have of the performance of the teams in the regular season, if I was told, hey, next week 2 teams are going to play, what would I propose as the odds for those teams? And given the information that I have, typically what happens is you have those opening odds. They'll normally be published a couple of weeks before a game. People start to bet on those in small amounts. They firm up, for want of a better word. Then analysts start to come in, more information comes in if someone's sick or something that will change those odds. But they typically, most of the volume is occurs right before the game, because that's when most information is available. And then the money line closes as the game starts, right? And that represents the best picture, I suppose, or market of the probabilities for that game, of the home team winning the game. So that's pretty important. And in fact, I managed to get a data set that included, you can see here, so I got this from Big Ball Data, but it includes a whole bunch of in-game stats, but it also includes the moneyline odds, and that's something that I looked at, I'm going to be working at and using LDA to create my own. Okay, so I suppose my first job was to get all the data out of that spreadsheet into R, and I used dplyr and tidyverse. I then mung together. The way that was sort of set out in the spreadsheet was that for every game there were two rows, one for the home team, one for the away team. I had to mung those together because I'm interested in the specifics of the home team and the away team together in that one game. So I did that, and then I actually started throwing a lot of data out, because a lot of it I wouldn't have. So in particular, for example, the goal difference 100% determines who wins or loses. I don't have that data prior to the game, so I'm not interested in that. I ended up sort of like boiling down to things that I could observe. So the things that I noticed were the compensation of the starting 5 players, the historic the win-loss ratio for the last 5 games. So if a team won 4 of their last 5 games, I actually mutated and computed that statistic, that running statistic, because that is a measure of persistence, and often will affect and impact how well they will do in the next game. Whether they're playing a home or away is big. Just out of the gate, 60% of games are won by the home team. So there is an advantage to playing at home. And then the other thing that's quite important that we can observe is the number of rest days since their last game. So if a game's playing, if a team's playing a game, back to back, so 0 rest days, they're often tired, and that can affect and impact their play. And you'll see that I've actually here, I've actually compiled these for, I've mung together the home and away team for those things. So I'm comparing those. I'm not doing them separately. It's like a difference. So I do that, and I end up with this like quite small numbers. 6 predictors, and H win is actually that's the logical. Did the home team win or not? There are approximately 1,200 games that were played in the last regular season. So that's done there. One thing that I found that I struggled with the LDA function was getting the scale. I want these to be scaled because some of them are much larger than others. Like for example, the compensation. But this is actually a natural log scale because the numbers are very large. Steph Curry, for example, is paid $45 million per annum. I think the lowest player is getting about $1 million. So I took the log of those, but then I needed to scale that data, and I actually ended up scaling it just by using the scale function, pre-scaling it because I couldn't get it to work when I did the LDA. I also sort of, like a cooking show, saving it for later, I started to save down some of the canonical correlation data sets. So first thing I just grabbed as many of these variables as I could, but then what I sort of thought I would do is I would take the observed inputs that went into my opening money line, computing my opening money line, and in the y-axis for the canonical, I put things like the goal difference and like the number of field goals and 3-pointers, so that because while I can't see them, maybe there's a correlation between those two. And so if I'm fielding a team that's doing well, maybe that shows up in the points, and so that's what I'm using the canonical correlation to do. Just give me some clues as to what to expect. Loaded the mass package, did the LDA here, and you can see we've got a bunch of things. So the home team rest days, home starting 5 compensation, home win-loss for the last 5 games, and then the same 3 factors for the away team. And you can see here that there's coefficients of discriminant, and the prior probabilities of these groups. I think I mentioned before, 58% of the time a home team wins. So that the prior is just basically it's the count of the number of home team wins divided by the total count for the prior. And I'm interested in actually that having completed this analysis, and you can see here that the 2 fact loadings that are really important are the starting 5 compensation for the home and the away team, and they're sort of around the right way. Basically, the more teams paid, the more the top 5 team play, that 0.77 big number, and it goes negative for the away team. When we're looking, we're trying to determine the probability of a home win. It's saying if I've got a team that's worth $100 million on the field and it's playing a team that's worth $20 million, it's going to really skew the probability to that home team winning. It's interesting to note that the rest days and the win-loss for the last 5 days are not so significant, but they are there. Okay. So the first plot that I bung that all into a data frame. Here, this first plot is a QQ plot of the LDA scores. I was wanting to check for sort of normality. It's okay. It's not bad. Tails are probably a little fat. Here's a box plot of the LDA scores by actual home wins. Here I'm just checking for variability. It looks okay. This is probably the thing that is most important for me, is a compute of the LDA score and then the posterior probability. And if you can, I've just highlighted here at 0.5. Essentially, if you've got an LDA score that is greater than about negative 0.3, then we would predict a win for the home team, i.e., in this part of the part of the curve that's above the 0.5 line. And that it's not very sharp. So one of the things that I found was that if I included, for example, the goal difference, then actually it predicted like who the winner would be 100% of the time. Well, the problem with that is if I knew the goal difference before the game started, well then I can see the future and I can't. So this soft line, soft slope line, means that there's quite a bit of ambiguity, and I wouldn't be expecting very extreme odds of like 10% or 90% chance of winning. And if you think about the NBA, like all of those teams on their day can win. So we'd expect odds to be around the middle. So you can see here, here are those posterior probabilities. So this isn't the LDA scores. Again, I'm just looking at sort of the by the actual I've categorized by the actual home wins, and you can see that the probabilities that I have that have sort of grouped to variance is sort of okay. It's about the same. There are some outliers, but that's okay. It's probably worth me comparing this to the the closing money line probabilities. So here, this is the same graph. So this is like, looking at when a team has actually won, and what were the money line odds that were implied, or what was the implied probability of the money line odds, and you can see those here that actually, typically the bookies were, that there is a differentiation between the two. When a team actually wins, the moneyline probability has them favoured to win. You can see this difference in mean of between 0.5 and 0.55%, and the whole distribution there. There are outliers, obviously. So one of the things I did was I just produced a linear regression of the posterior probabilities that I produced for a home win and compared them to the moneyline ones. And I got quite a significant output. So you can see here the R squared around about 70%, and the significance of both the intercept, which doesn't really matter, but but in particular, if the relationship between the slope here, which is near, well, it's not 1, but it's near 1. One thing to keep in mind is that my odds are very much, they're using all the data up to that game, to the game in question, and they are probably more akin to opening money line odds. So it's like we're a bookmaker would say, okay, this game's coming up. What do I think are the odds, the initial odds I should offer to attract interest in betting on the game? And that's different to the moneyline odds that are being used here, which are the closing odds as the game starts. So there's a lot more information that's available at that point. I've produced a graph of those, my posterior probability of a home win from my model, LDA model, and I'm comparing that to the moneyline ones. You can see the linear relationship between the two, and they both, there is some variance around it, and I would explain at least some of that being the passage of time between the opening odds and the closing odds. As new information comes out, those odds change and move. I produced a couple of confusion matrices. One for this first one is for my odds here. So you can see I predicted a home win 588 times of this to 1200 times, and I also predicted 185 home losses, and got those right. I had an error rate of about 5 in 12 games. So that's it's significant. It wasn't actually too much worse. In fact, my model performs better than the moneyline odds did in predicting a winner. Out of the gate. But was if I wanted to compare this to the moneyline odds, I did worse at predicting losers. So I got that wrong. But about the same in sort of getting the bet wrong, just a little bit different spread. Okay. So that's my result. And if I was a bookmaker, I'd be able to use this model for opening odds, and I think it would be useful. My canonical correlation analysis, here really what I was doing is sort of like going back and sort of saying, well, look, I've got very little data that I'm using as inputs to my LDA. Maybe if I can stack that numerical data against what I have, what actually happens in the game, like goals and actual features that win or lose the game. Maybe there's that those things sort of show up, and in a biplot I'll be able to go, oh well, A, that's significant, and B, if these players, if teams are rested, maybe that shows up in their free throw percentages or something like that. So that was my idea there. I did the canonical correlation. I included 999 permutations. It's significant, but it's the actual RDAR squareds are quite low. So given one set of the X information here was the inputs that I used for my LDA analysis. The Y inputs were actually a bunch of I think they're up here. They're basically stats within, and much more like points. These points here, this Y. So this is goal difference, field goals, 3-pointers, free throws. That's offensive ratio, defensive ratio, turnovers, personal fouls, and those sorts of things that they are all in there. And that I can't see in the game, but I'm hoping that there'll be some association. There were a couple that actually are significant and appear to be significant. I'm trying to get this to appear on the screen. This last graph is being a bit. Bear with me for a second. It won't. There you go. So this last graph here, you can see. So on the right is all of my LDA inputs, and the two very the two variables that are explanatory variables that are well explained by my first two canonical correlation axes. The compensation for the home team and the away team, and that in different quadrants, that sort of makes sense, right? I would expect them to be working sort of against each other. If you're told one team's paid 100 million, the other's paid 50, that would have a significant impact. In this other plot, the red plot, the only thing that really is significantly, which is actually almost wholly explained by the canonical axis 1, is the home team goal difference. And that makes sense too. Like that's, that ultimately determines the game. If the home team goal difference is +5, they win. And so, but I'm not seeing this arrow in the same direction as either of these two. Although I could take the, that's not the Absika, is it the Absika? Absika length here, and of those two, and they definitely, correlate well with the home goal difference. Everything else in here, so all the other points that are scored during the game, which ultimately all add up to the, and can find their way into the home goal difference, but not as actually it's important here to note that they're not a linear combination to make that. They are not necessarily significant. So, they don't get past this 0.5 parameter. a lot like the other factors in here. So I think that's where, while there is a statistically significant difference between a linkage between the two in the analysis, that a lot is not explained by these first two axes, or it's limited explanation. I'm going to leave it there because I'm at 15 minutes and it should have only been 10. If you have any questions or feedback or suggestions, I'd really appreciate it. And I suppose I've got to get on to the write-up. Speak to you soon.